President Cyril Ramaphosa says youth unemployment is at the top of government's agenda. According to the Spectator Index, South Africa has the highest youth unemployment rate in the world.
We're saying that the right figure to think about in terms of South Africa's crisis is the expanded figure of 10.3 million and rising every day.
You go to Limpopo, you go to the Eastern Cape, we're sitting over 44%.
Well, South Africa's unemployment rate has reached an all-time high of just over 30%, and by the expanded definition, it sits at 39.7%. That's with close to 40,000 people having lost their jobs in the first quarter and approximately 8.5 million youths without employment.
We're anticipating quite a hit on youth. So we are looking at large numbers of youth who are going to be searching for employment. And given the number of small businesses that seem to be on their knees or who have already closed, we don't see those opportunities opening up in the near future. Yeah. But that is the most likely place for employment for young people. And that does seem to be decimated. Absolutely. I think government's going to have to really pull something out of the hat.
According to the Centre of Development and Enterprise Government must start focusing on the catalytic changes required to produce faster growing and targeted interventions. And
we've got to look at what are the real costs of all these millions of people who are unemployed, to the individual, to the family, to the household, to the community, to our society. And unemployment, a multi-generational crisis of unemployment, disadvantages, excludes the unemployed more and more and more as time goes on. And that's why CDE is saying we have to do something. We have to get people into the labor force. We've got to think about how we're going to get millions of jobs.
What are your thoughts about policy positions like a program that would guarantee everyone a job from the federal government?
But that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's claimed that unemployment is low, but that's mostly fakery. I mean, you're classified as employed if you work 1 hour a week. If you take a look at the job quality indices, do people have decent jobs and are they paid, below the average wage? The job quality index is going way down. But there's a way out of that. The government provided jobs, and they're desperately needed. I mean, U.S. infrastructure is totally collapsing. Don't have to give you examples. That's a lot of very good jobs. Private industry is not going to pay for them. Those should be government jobs. Same is true all the way up to high technology. Where do computers come from? The internet, the whole high-tech industry. Public funding in the 50s, 60s, and 70s continues until today. The advanced tech is mostly, just like pharmaceuticals, mostly done at public expense. There's plenty of opportunities for the public through the government, the one institution that's theoretically responsive to the public, to develop the economy and provide full jobs. It's not done for ideological reasons. The government is the one institution that's somewhat responsive to the public. Private corporations aren't. So you get rid of the government, move it to private capital, you're moving it to unaccountable private tyrannies. And nobody's supposed to say that, but it doesn't take a brilliant mind to see that that's what's happening. So yes, government-sponsored programs for decent jobs, which would also help the society. We'd be much better off with real infrastructure, with sustainable development, with solar energy, wind power, and so on. But that's going to require a government initiative. So that would be the obvious thing to do.
For too long, too many Americans have faced lousy jobs or no jobs. One answer, a guaranteed job at a living wage. But the real problem is there aren't enough adequately paying jobs to go around. Even today, with a low official unemployment rate, millions who work part-time jobs want full-time work. Millions more are too discouraged to look for work having endured the brutalities of job discrimination for far too long, or unable to move to where the jobs are. And a large and growing number of jobs don't pay enough to get people out of poverty. At the same time, a lot of work needs to be done, greening our nation's infrastructure, caring for the elderly, teaching in our public schools, adequately staffing national parks, you name it. So why shouldn't the federal government create jobs and connect them directly to people who can't otherwise find one, with decent, predictable hours and at a living wage? An added plus, the availability of such jobs would give more bargaining power to many low-wage workers to get better hours and wages, because if they don't get them from their employer, they'd have the option of a public job. In this way, a federal job guarantee would raise the floor for job quality nationwide. And a job guarantee would act as a giant economic stabilizer during downturns, when the first to lose their jobs are usually the most economically marginalized. Can we afford a job guarantee today? Yes. It's estimated to cost around $670 billion in its first year, $30 billion less than the defense budget. But that tab would quickly shrink. With more people working at better wages, Americans would have more purchasing power to buy goods and services. This would lead to more hiring by the private sector and eventually less need for the federal job guarantee. More people working would also generate more tax revenue, partially offsetting the direct cost of the job guarantee. Additional savings would come from fewer people needing public assistance. The Center for Labor Research and Education at Berkeley estimates that the federal government now spends over $150 billion a year because workers aren't earning enough to get out of poverty. So doesn't it make more sense to use this money to create guaranteed jobs at a living wage? So let's think beyond Trump to what Americans need. Few things are more important than a decent job. Full employment through a federal job guarantee makes sense for workers, for the economy, for America.
Try to have, let's say, full employment types of policies, because MMT is also advocating, let's say, at a practical level, the idea of a job guarantee. And these are things also which could be important, because in most of Africa, the aggregate demand is low, and the countries could not rely on exports because often they are not very competitive, etc. That means they have to rely on their own domestic markets. But with a scheme like the job guarantee, you could increase aggregate demand and also increase the possibilities for domestic firms, let's say, to develop, etc. So there are many potential uses we could make of MMT.
Hi, I'm Jane Sanders, founder of the Sanders Institute. I'm so pleased to be here today with one of our founding fellows, Dr. Stephanie Kelton, who is a professor of public policy and economics at Stony Brook University and has been chief economist in the U.S. Senate Budget Committee.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks for coming. I'm so excited to talk with you.
So now you have just completed a paper about a national jobs guarantee.
Well, this has been something that I've been working on. It's been part of my research for my entire academic career. So almost 20 years. It's hard to believe that it's been that long, but this is something that's been important to me for a really long time. If we had programs like this one in place to absorb people when they lose their jobs, when the economy turns down, instead of throwing millions of people into the unemployment lines and having a recovery that's so slow because people lose their job, they lose their income, and the economy doesn't recover and it doesn't recover. You know, it took us 9 years to claw back the jobs that were lost in the Great Recession. And if we had a program that took people when the economy turns down, and instead of saying you're going to be unemployed for a while, maybe a really long while, we took them in and we employed them right away, because we know that employers, the last person they want to hire is the unemployed person. They want people who are already working. They want to hire off the top. They don't want to hire off of what they perceive to be the bottom. Somebody who hasn't been working, doesn't have a record to draw on to show that they've been actively doing something. And so a program like this is a safeguard for people, and it's a safeguard for the economy as well. So You're right. People will look at this economy and they'll say, this is full employment. Except for 17 million or so Americans, this isn't full employment.
Yes.
You've got people who are officially unemployed, the people that everyone pays attention to, those official unemployed folks. But then you've got lots of people who are stuck in part-time jobs who really want full-time work, but they can't have it because their bosses won't give them hours to make them full-time workers, so they lack the income that they really want, and they lack the benefits that go often with full-time work. And then you've got lots and lots of people, millions in fact, of Americans who got discouraged. They gave up. They dropped out of the labor force and they're no longer looking for work. But if you ask them, would you like a job, and would you take a job tomorrow if it were available to you, they'll say, I absolutely would. So you're looking at 16 to 17 million people who are just forgotten and left behind, even in an economy that many economists will look at and tell you is full employment.
It sounds like you're talking about another WPA.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the model. I mean, I think in the 21st century, we have to go beyond where FDR was in the 1930s, 1940s. But it would be modeled on the WPA, something massive in scale, where the government puts people to work doing a variety of projects. I think a lot of times when people hear WPA, they think roads and bridges and that sort of thing. And that can certainly be part of a program like this. The CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, was another New Deal program, right? And that dealt in many ways with environmental concerns. The NYA, the National Youth Administration, was one of the alphabet soup programs in the New Deal, and that's jobs programs for youth. So we have very high unemployment rates for young people in this country. We have an environmental catastrophe. There are ways to put people to work, caring for our planet, caring for one another, rebuilding roads and infrastructure, and caring for our community. So, you can think very imaginatively, the way they did in the WPA, where people were performing public theater, the arts were part of it, recording oral histories. I mean, it isn't just a shovel and something to fill in a road. We can think very, very creatively about the kinds of jobs we want to create for people in the 21st century.
So for those of us who might not understand a national jobs program, give it to us in a nutshell.
So the idea would be that anyone who wants to work and contribute, but can't find any way to do that in the economy, has a place to go. And so you can imagine taking the unemployment offices that exist all over this country today and just taking the U and the N off of the sign and turning them into employment offices. So it's a one-stop shopping kind of a thing. Person walks in and says, I'm looking for work. And they sit down and they talk with someone and they find out, what kind of experience do you have? You don't want to take someone who's got skills that could be used in one way and put them into employment where you're not kind of getting the benefit that you could from their own experience and training. And so you're fitting the job to the worker, and you're allowing the worker and the community to have a say in what it is that people are going to be put to work to do. And you can be as flexible as you want. You can make work part-time to accommodate people who have other, maybe they're going to school, maybe they have a child, maybe they want some hours but not a full-time job. Other people want full-time work, and you've got to make sure that those jobs are available for people who want them. So what we did in this study was go really big, and we took an ambitious wage and benefit package, and we said what we believe is that anyone who's working full-time in America should not be living in poverty. And that means choosing a wage that will allow a family of 3 or 4 to have one person working and to pull that family out of poverty. So we start at $15 an hour. And then we said, you know what, we want not just a living wage, but we want people to have some benefits as well. So we offer a package that includes a $15 an hour minimum wage, and then we costed out some benefits. It would be up to the community and government in the process of implementing this, whether that looks like paid family leave, whether it looks like sick pay, whether it's vacation, what those benefits are could be determined later, but we also said it ought to include health care. And so we included that in the cost of this program. So we really did go big, and we did it on purpose because we wanted to be able to demonstrate that you could do something of this magnitude that would employ 15 to 20 million Americans at any point in time in the business cycle and pay them a living wage and provide benefits that include health care, and do it in a way that improves the overall economic condition as well as lifting millions of people out of poverty, and children as well. And the problem isn't the worker, the problem is the economy itself. There's something wrong with the system that can't generate employment for everybody in the economy. And that's the problem that we have and have always had, and quite frankly will always have. In a market economy, a certain segment of the population will always be unuseful, in the sense that private employers don't want to hire all of the labor that wants to work. And so you've got to figure out how to deal with that. Do you just allow them to sit unemployed and you send them unemployment compensation, or do you do something else that gives them a better shot, makes better use of them, brings them in, is more inclusive, makes them feel part of the economy, and allows them to contribute? Because you're right, they would rather contribute than sit home and collect a check. I think that is definitely part of what we envision, because again, as you transition toward green energy, you're going to have workers with different skill sets. And as we close coal plants and transition away from fossil fuels, we're going to need workers with a different skill set, okay? And so some of what you can have people doing in this program is retraining in a way that prepares them for the kind of work around which you want to center your economic activity.
Okay, let's talk about the economy. Can you tell me what positive effects there would be on the economy? And then, as a counterweight, what negative effects might there be? And how would you mitigate them?
So if we were to do this in the way that we look at in the paper, which again is really ambitious, right? What we find is that employing 15 to 19 million people puts additional income into that many people's hands, which then the most of that gets spent into the economy, which through secondary effects has, positive spillover to the economy, right? I get a job, I currently don't work, now I have a job and I have an income, I go out and I spend. Now some restaurant gets, some revenue that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise, some profit, so they hire another busboy. And you know how the multiplier works in economics, you get a benefit to the economy as a whole. So our research says that this kind of program would add $500 to $600 billion a year on average to real GDP. So it's a real shot in the arm for the economy. And of course, if you take 15 million or so people and give them an income that they then start spending into the economy, you would expect a pretty significant boost to economic activity. The concern would be, but what if you overheat things? What if all of that spending is just too much and the economy can't accommodate all of that additional demand? Then you'd end up with an inflation problem, which would be potentially disastrous depending on how bad it got. But what we were able to show is that there's so much slack in the economy today. Businesses are operating with all kinds of extra unused capacity. There's plenty of room to ramp up demand without creating an inflation problem. People will say the economy is close to full employment, but if you actually look at how much spare capacity there is, we can fill a huge void, adding to real GDP, raising incomes, boosting economic output with a modest increase in inflation. And so that's what we would be looking at. That would be the risk.
How much will this cost?
Well, it depends how many people take it up, but our estimates are between 1.5% of GDP and 3% of GDP. So it's really fairly modest. If you think you're getting 15 million or so people employed at $15 an hour with benefits and health care, and you say, and it costs only 1.5% of our national GDP, that's a pretty good deal.